Please, Mr. Kidwai, I request you to give the keynote address.
Thank you. Professor Khalid Saeed, Professor Moria, Professor Marathe, Professor Patil, Professor Amna Kishore, Dr. Om Prakash, and Dr. Shagufta, scholars and students of English studies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first felicitate the organizers of this conference on having chosen such a novel and refreshingly original theme for the study of English literature. And for this, I would like to compliment in particular Professor Amna Kishore, whom I have had the pleasure of personally knowing for the last 40 years. She was our colleague there at the Aligarh Muslim University. I won't say it is a pity, this is just how things move, but I will definitely say that our loss has been your gain, Professor Kishore. You have known she was the principal of very big women's college at the Aligarh Muslim University. So being an academic administrator is an achievement in itself. What is more important is she was a mentor. She helped set up Indian Writing in English and ELT at our Department of English at the Aligarh Muslim University. And more importantly, as a role model, she shaped the lives and career of so many young fellows sitting here. So I'm sure you are in very able hands, and under her dynamic leadership, the department would grow. That's what I have seen at Aligarh, and I'm sure the same will be replicated with greater vigor at Maulana Azad University. So I must compliment her and the entire team of the Department of English. Right. Your innovativeness and inventiveness goes beyond the juggling of words. Rather, it brings into play certain semantic signifiers. I won't delve into deconstruction and Derrida's views here, but certainly your placement of non-native literature in English on the center stage is both a bold and highly welcome statement. For it marks a clean break away from the former hazy and both confused and confusing nomenclature of this particular subfield of English studies. Let me substantiate the point, especially for the benefit of the young scholars of English studies. As non-native writers appeared on the English literature scene, the first one being Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain, a Bengali Muslim lady with her collection of short stories entitled Sultana's Dream, published in 1905, followed by another Muslim woman of this historic town, that's Hyderabad, Iqbalun Nisa Hussain, in 1920s. Literary critics and historians appeared somewhat uneasy, unsure, undecided on naming or terming this unprecedented phenomena. Bhavani Bhattacharya coined, or maybe he simply repeated the quaint term Indo-Anglican for this phenomena, while Balarajan had to rest content with the innocuous label India for his piece on this topic in the edited volume on the literature of the world in English. In M.K. Naik's pioneering studies on this subject, Indian writing in English, this assumed a more respectable and self-explanatory label of Indian writing in English. Let me, at this juncture, mention my teacher and guru there at Aligarh, Professor Harish Raizada. He was the first to write critical works on this subject, but poor Raizada, he had to take the help of metaphors. The title of his book was The Lotus and the Rose, the Lotus and the Rose standing, I need not add, for English and India respectively. Anyway, so this was something very hazy. Confusion nonetheless persisted for some time more, as such titles as rubrics as Indo-English novelist or Indo-English fiction, they were used. Then this subfield was subsumed under the broader, larger rubric of Commonwealth studies. But of late, there has been growing recognition of the non-native writings in English. Little wonder then that such an important reference work as the Cambridge Guide is no longer called as Cambridge Guide to English Literature. It is called the Cambridge Guide to Literature in English. So the organizers of the conference have captured the essence of this important development in English studies in our time, and so doing, they have perhaps also articulated the ethos of the all-pervasive globalization of our time, and if I'm not very much off the mark, of the market forces of our time in talking about non-native literature in English. Right, so while placing on record my admiration for your ingenuity, let me confess also my inadequacies in dabbling with this intellectually challenging theme. Nonetheless, as a student of literary Orientalism and being both literally and metaphorically the other within quote, as ingrained in native English literary tradition, it is indeed my privilege and pleasure to share with you some of my observations on the nexus between politics and literature, that's the first area. Then on the fascinating and instructive history of representation or stereotyping. Then on some trends in the current Muslim writings, also on the affinities between cultures in literature and multiculturalism in general, which put together may give you some idea of the some new emerging areas of research in English studies. To begin with, this representation or stereotyping in literature, I will quote Norman Daniel, who has written with an authority on the history of ideas in the West. I quote Daniel, "By misapprehension and misrepresentation, an idea of the beliefs and practices of one society can pass into the accepted myth of another society in a form so distorted that its relation to the original facts is sometimes barely discernible. Doctrines that are the expressions of the spiritual outlook of the enemy are interpreted ungenerously and with prejudice, and even facts are modified and in good faith in order to suit a particular interpretation." So, the genesis, history, and main lines of literary Orientalism. Literary Orientalism, they hinge on the encounter between the West and Islam in the military, religious, diplomatic, political, and socio-cultural domains from 7th century up to our time. It is highly unfortunate that it was mostly in terms of religious differences and hostility that Europe first learned about Islam and Muslims. Islam was perceived as a heresy, and Muslims were cast in the role of enemy. And what kind of enemy? As a fierce, irrational people given to violence and lust. So far as the knowledge of Islam in the medieval West is concerned, R.W. Southern, a historian, he brands this period of 700 to 1100 as the age of ignorance. This negative image is reflected in the polemical writings and literary texts of the day and even of much later date, which constitute the corpus of literary Orientalism. As we examine the early specimen of literary Orientalism, in just one word, I will describe them as a distorting mirror. An important and early literary source for studying the image of Islam is provided by Chanson de Geste, that's the oral poetry of medieval France, 10th, 11th, 12th century. These heroic poems, primarily meant for entertaining the public, which are found mostly in 12th century manuscripts, exercise great influence on European literature, including, of course, English literature. They represent Islam as a despicable form of paganism. They denounce the Islamic practice of segregation of women, polygamy, harems, divorce, and ascribe sexual promiscuity to Muslims. And there were historical reasons. These poems, they were composed against the backdrop of crusades. We know very well the crusades ended in the year 1200. So against this backdrop, we should have a look at these points. And that's why the romances of 12th, 13th, 14th century, before English literature proper came into picture, the romances and early 13th, 14th century poets, whether it is Langland, whether it is John Gower, or whether it is Thomas Lydgate, all of them, they are found depicting a picture of Islam which is not true, which is not accurate, and lack of communication may be ascribed to that. As we move on to Chaucer, the father of English literature, and of course one of the enlightened and humanist poet, we find there is some recognition of Islamic scholarship. Chaucer is speaking highly of Muslim philosophers, whether Ibn Sina, whether Razi, because these were now available in English translation. But still, some polemical traces are there. Then as we pass on to Christopher Marlowe's Tamburlaine, that itself, the title or the place significant because that was the political reality. But it has certain glaring anomalies and negative portrayal of the Orient. And that's why the Lebanese Christian literary critic of our time, Naji Oejen, what he says, that Marlowe presented to his Elizabethan audience a picture of the Orient they desired to see, not the picture of the East as it is, but a picture of the East as they desired to see an Orient filled with treachery, cruelty, and false doctrines, an Orient that was destroyed by its own rulers. So this is something to do with representation and even with politics of literature. A common expression used in the early 17th century literature, employed mainly for pouring scorn and contempt, was Turk. And there are so many examples of this even in Shakespeare, Othello, King Lear, Hamlet. In my paper, I've given all the references. Turk. Turk being synonymous with someone treacherous, someone unreliable, someone lustful, and that again has to be seen against the context of the Ottoman victory over Byzantine and the historical context. According to Louis Vaughan, at least 47 plays by major Elizabethan playwrights were staged. More significant is the reason which accounts for such a keen interest in these plays with the Oriental content and context. She says, 2/3 of these Oriental plays were tragedies because the Elizabethans considered the East as the domain of war, conquest, fratricide, brother, lust, and treachery. So once again, the same political angle or what you want to see that is being depicted in literature. So the image of the Islamic world thus retains some of the old polemical strain of the medieval times. Nonetheless, it signifies a slight departure from the medieval prejudiced view of Islam and Muslims. It records some positive appreciation for the Islamic life and ways. This positive or this departure, it had been brought about by closer and first-hand contact. In 1453, Muslims conquered Constantinople, and the center of Byzantine Empire was replaced by the Ottoman Empire. 3 trading companies were established, so that's why there are more trade, travel, and diplomacy links, better understanding between the Muslims and Europeans and the Westerners. So there is less of polemical strain, but still certain misconceptions persisted. How truth gradually makes its way against prejudice is borne out by Thomas Brown's collection of essays, that's Vulgar Errors, which corrects a misconception, among others, originating from the medieval works on Islam. And this misconception was that the prophets has a hanging tomb in Medina, and it was reported by Marlowe in Tamerlane and was repeated even in 19th century by Robert Southey and Thomas More in Lalla Rookh. This medieval report that the prophet's body hangs in an iron chest in the mid-air in his mosque in Medina is dismissed by Brown. He is a 15th Elizabethan Renaissance writer, so he dismisses it as fabulous and evidently false. So this is an instance how false or misconceptions are gradually removed. So references to the Islamic world, they are found in later 17th century also to the perfumes of Arabia in Milton's Paradise, then in Pope's Dunciad, Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot, in Butler's Hudibras, in Congreve's Wave of the Word, then in Goldsmith's Citizen of the World. Here I will draw your attention. In Goldsmith's letters, Citizen of the World, one particular letter talk about the Islamic belief about the absence of soul in women. This is something very interesting. According to Goldsmith, and this is what he heard from medieval reports, that Muslims believe that women don't have souls. I also happen to be a student of Islamic religious text. In Islamic tafasir, with all references, I have come across reports that Christians don't believe that women have souls. Poor woman, she is the guinea pig, and these, the two great religions, they are expressing their authorities, expressing these views, and in order to discredit, Christians say that Muslims don't believe so, and Muslims say that Christians don't believe so. And it was Byron that who corrected this. So this is how misconceptions, misperceptions flourish, and at the expense of, under the garb of theology and religious knowledge. Then we find references to Islam and Muslims in Johnson's Irene and Rasselas, in Dryden's Don Sebastian and Aurangzeb, also in Messenger. In pre-Romantic period, 18th century, we have a major work on literary Orientalism, that is William Beckford's Wasiq. The title itself is very significant. There was an Abbasid caliph, Wasiq Billah. So centered on him, here is a big work of fiction. So, and it is very rich in Oriental material and mostly free from any kind of bias or prejudice against Muslims. So that is a landmark in literary Orientalism. Another positive development in the field is the lady traveler, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, 1689 to 1762. Before she described the harem, the lady's apartment in Muslims' palaces, before her description, harem is something titillating. Harem is a synonym for a brothel, a place where you can fulfill all your sexual fantasies. Look, she was a woman, she had access to harem, she met the queen, the princess there in the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul, and it was she who for the first time divested harem of this sensationalistic. Then there are works of all the major Romantic poets, whether it is Coleridge, whether it is Shelley, Byron, Keats, Crabbe, Landor, Leigh Hunt, name any Romantic poet, he has written something about the Orient, about Islam and Muslims in their own varied ways, and I have provided all the details in my paper, of which the copies you will get. Very quickly, let me tell, in Coleridge, it is just in Kubla Khan, and in other poems, there are just references to the Orient, whereas in Shelley, It has a political context, political angle. The Orientalism of Shelley is essentially a means for airing his radical views on the issues confronting Europe of his day. Another distinguishable mark of Shelley's Orientalism is his adherence to convention in depicting a negative view of Islam, and as a result, his endorsement, as in the case of his contemporary, that is Robert Sadeh, of colonialism and evangelism in the British India. It sounds very strange. Shelley, with all his radical ideas, revolutionary order, revolutionary spirit, with all his ideals of French Revolution, but he believes that Christian missionary work is suited best for British India because he thinks that will lead to enlightenment of the illiterate Indians in India. So there is something deeply political there. Then in Wordsworth, there is a dream of the Arab, reference to the dream of the Arab in Prelude. That is also significant because for the first time, an Arab or a Muslim is presented as a culture hero. There is communication, there is dialogue, there is conversation between that Arab and the poet. So that way, it is a significant departure from convention. Then we have Keats. Keats shows remarkable familiarity with Arabian Nights, and that's another interesting thing that this Arabian Nights in 18th, 19th century, it had gained tremendous popularity in Europe, including England. So many editions, translations, abridgments came out of the Arabian Nights. Then I move on to this politics of literature, but before that, I will just begin with a very recent example. You recall, some of you would recall, a few years ago, Khushwant Singh's novel came out, In the Company of Women, and full of several episodes. One of the episodes is in the hero, Mohan Kumar. He is a student in the States, and you know, typical Khushwant Singh's typical style, this kind of, it is not even romance, it is just affairs, one night stands. So this Mohan Kumar, he has affairs with many girls, one of them being Yasmin, someone from Pakistan, not just Pakistan, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. They have an affair and it results in lovemaking. And at the end of that chapter, Khushwant Singh very playfully says, look, Yasmin, this is how we should resolve Kashmir issue as well. Fine. Last year I came across its Urdu translation and I was very curious. I didn't look at anything else, just look at that chapter. What does the Pakistani edition of this novel or this particular episode it do? And here is the politics of literature or politics of translation. That poor Yasmin had vanished. She was replaced by a Tibetan girl. So India-Tibet differences could be resolved by this kind of lovemaking. So there is political angle in literature, and there are so many examples in this literary Orientalism. I will focus just on one romantic poet. Many of you may have not even heard of him, but in his time he was highly influential, highly popular, a great friend of Wordsworth and Coleridge. He was a Nobel laureate. His works sold in thousands. His name was Robert Southey. Southey or Sadeh, even his name has got two different pronunciations. He wrote 2 or 3 epic poems. One of these is The Curse of Kehama. Kehama, name of a Hindu Raja. The poem is all about negative features of Hinduism, sati, early marriage, child marriage, Hindu rituals of worship. Along similar lines, he wrote another long epic poem, an Arabic name for that, Salba. There, Islam, Baghdad, Muslims presented negatively. So doing, Sadeh is extending or endorsing the evangelical mission of certain Christian missionaries. And it had its impact. In 1813, the British Parliament amended the East India Act, and it allowed Christian missionaries to carry out missionary work. Look, my dear students of English, here is a point for you to ponder. Writers, consciously or unconsciously, they become catalysts of this political or legislative developments. Robert Sadeh, on the basis, he is not doing something on his own, on the basis of the input which he received from Christian missionaries about the darkness, about the backwardness, about the superstition in India, he writes a poem. The poem is about the civilizing mission. It should be carried out in India. It needs to be redeemed. It is not just a political question. It is a divine duty. That is our moral duty to go and civilize and redeem these people. Who is playing in whose hands? Very difficult to say. The same role is now taken over by media. Media builds up, a hype is there, we act on that, and it is very difficult to say who is playing in whose hands, but certainly Sadeh, by presenting Islam and Hinduism as obstructions, as being obscurantist, as being totally negative, he was making these political statements there. That's why, generally speaking, romantic poetry, romantic school is not associated with politics, but as I said, among all these romantic poets, this political angle is there, very much with reference to their depiction of the Orient. Same, I will just give you one example of one positive example or departure from that is of Lord Byron. His Orientalism is quite positive, empathetic, understanding. He stayed for some time in Turkey, in Albania. Again, human touch, personal touch, first-hand interaction, communication, that helps in removing misunderstanding and misperception. So, for example, there is a poem by Turkish Tale, there is a poem by Byron called The Bride of Abydos, and there is that the character there, Zulekha, the heroine, she is the quintessence of religious values, and childlike innocence is underlined by a series of Oriental similes. I quote, just give you an example how aptly Byron uses the Oriental simile. He says, Zulekha, blessed as the muezzin's strain from Makkah's wall, to pilgrims pure and prostrate at his call, soft as the melody of youthful days. So this Oriental diction of muezzin, Makkah, and pilgrims, everything that stands to Byron's credit, that he allows a genuine Oriental to describe from his strictly Islamic position all the incidents of the poem. In Byron's other poems also, The Corsair, The Siege of Corinth, Oriental material is there, but free from polemical strain. As I said, even in Thomas More, the political angle is there, but with a difference. As you all know, Thomas More was an Irish. So his principal concern in using the Oriental setting in both Lala Roch, look at the title of his collection of poems. 4 poems are included in this beautiful collection of stories, Lala Roh. So Lala Roh and the Love of the Angels, these are the two main works of Thomas More in which Oriental material is there. But he is using the Oriental material as a pretext. Pretext for what? For expressing his views about the Irish cause. The Muslim heroes, heroines are there, but they are not. They are actually a pretext for the Irish freedom fighters of 1820s, 1830s. As far as the Victorians are concerned, among the Victorians, we have Tennyson, Tennyson's several poems on India, about Muslims. Then we have Arnold, Sohrab and Rustam, then his Persian Passion play. So now with the phenomenal increase in the 20th century, the interaction between the Orient and the West at every level, it is not surprising to note frequent references to the Orient, not only in literature, but also in cinema, popular fiction, and electronic media. The quantum of representation has also become too vast to be covered in this brief presentation. Nonetheless, mention should be made of the unmistakable Oriental elements of these 20th century writers, that is Kipling, Foster, Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and the fairly recent Nobel laureate, that is Doris Lessing. She is very much influenced by Sufism, mystical thought. So this interaction between the Orient and the West goes on. Now, I will give you just one example of Orientalism in popular fiction, pulp fiction that thrives on sensation. My example is Sassoon's two bestsellers, Princess and Princess Sultana's Daughters, published by Bantam Books, New York in 1993-1994, not long time ago. And both the novels full of venom against Islam, Muslims, and all Islam that Islam stands for. So this popular fiction is also swayed by these kind of extremist tendencies. Very briefly about Sassoon's work, as in other polemical works, the binary contrast between Muslim and Western society, biased in the latter's favor, is very much evident. Sassoon plays upon this sensation or popular beliefs in discrediting Islam. For example, she twists the knife in the wound by tracing the plight of foreign working women. Foreign working women in Saudi Arabia, they may have some genuine problems. It goes without saying. Any country, including Saudi Arabia, they may have problems. But according to her, Muslims consider any woman who is not a Muslim a prostitute. And she traces it to the Quran. She says the Quran teaches them that any Muslim, any woman who is not a Muslim, she is a prostitute and does not deserve any respect, any kind of good treatment. So this is what we call sheer sensationalism, or taking it to the extreme. As you all students of literature, you are aware, Orientalism, it started with Edward Said's very influential work published in 1978, entitled Orientalism as such. Some of you might be wondering, what is Orientalism? So for your benefit, very briefly, let me tell you what does literary Orientalism or Orientalism, what does it signify, what does it represent? Number one, the classical tradition of studying a region by means of its languages and writings. Thus, anyone who teaches, researches, or writes about the Orient is an Orientalist. Simple definition. It is in this form that Orientalism lives on through its doctrines and theses, with expert Orientalists as its main authority. So there are Orientalists who are specialized in Islam and Muslim. There are Orientalists like Sir William Jones, Max Muller, who is specialized on India. Then Orientalism is a way of coming to terms with the Orient that is based on the Orient's special place in European Western experience. Experience or imagination. That's the point where politics or political considerations come in. Orientalism may also be defined as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. Manipulation. Manipulation at every level. That's what the going says. There was colonialism, colonialism over land, the body, slave trade, that was body, then empire on territory, and today we live in the age where this colonialism is on the level of the mind. Our minds are being captured or manipulated. So this is what Orientalism is there. Now, very briefly, Muslim literature in English. The subtopics are an example of non-native literature in English. In a sense, Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall, who was then owned also Iqbalun Nisa Hussain of Hyderabad, then Ahmad Ali, another major writer of 1940, then Atiya Hussain, born 1913, 1998. She was a trendsetter with her superb novel, Sunlight on a Broken Column, so she laid the foundation, in a sense, of the variety of that novel, which we now brand as emigre or exilic literature. Professor Marathe referred just now to diaspora, diasporic literature. I recall my horror when I heard this word for the first time in one of the selection committees. One of the candidates who was working on this emigre or exilic literature, and she referred to Anita Desai or someone as diaspora, because I was fed on biblical diaspora. In Bible, diaspora is such a sacred, such a, come on, this economic migrants who are just there for greener pastures, how can they be equated with that his thousands of year old tradition of diaspora? That was diaspora, Jewish diaspora. For faith, you are being persecuted, wandering, leading such a difficult life. Not globetrotter flying by the night, people like us. How can they be related to diaspora? It is still, but the term is very much there. These writers and this experience is known as diaspora. To me, it is better to refer to it as exilic. Even exile is a very strong word. Exile has its political and ideological overtones, which in the case of these writers, none. Anita Desai, in the morning she is in Bombay, in the evening she may be in London, next week she may again be there. There's no question of roots with this internet, with this mobile. What is that? Distances, they have lost their meaning. So, but it was Atiya Hussain who 1960s she introduced it. Another very remarkable feature of Atiya Hussain's novel is her depiction of the multi-faith India. Lucknow is the locale of her novel, and how this composite culture was there in 1930s, 40s, and how under the insanity of partition or communal divide, how this fabric was lost forever. That's the most important aspect of Atiya Hussain, which needs to be explored. And I say this because some time ago, as a UGC research project, I carried out a survey of major Indian writings in English to examine the image of Muslim women. In one word, can I describe my findings? I scanned literally dozens of novels to find out what is the image of Muslim women in these writings. Can you guess what could it be? It was not there. Muslim women does not exist. Marginalized. They are not there in the broader picture. They are not there in the consciousness. In very vague terms, as courtesans or in film, they could be there. That's a very sad, and that's what I said in relation to Atiya Hussain. Working together, friendship, social relations. And now Muslim woman does not exist. Believe me, I scanned dozens of novels. She's not there. They don't exist in the social scene. And then there are many more Muslim writers of our time based in Canada, other places, whether it is Wasanji, whether Adib Khan, Farzana Sheikh, Zainab Al-Kali, Somalian, Nigerian, from all different corners of the world. They are there and they are worth studying. I will just mention in particular for the attention of young students of English here, please do read Kaisra Shehraz. She is a British of Pakistani descent, published 2 or 3 novels. Her latest novel, the title is The Holy Woman. Holy Woman, with that cultural allusion to Sindh in Pakistan, where these waderas, landlords, for the fear of not dividing their property, ancestral property, they marry their daughters to the Quran, which has nothing to do with Islam, just a mercenary, purely financial, this lust is there, and they say that you, instead, because once they marry, then and they don't have a son, so the property will go outside, so they marry her to the Quran. And that way, that poor girl, she becomes the holy woman. So, not for tackling that particular issue, I am not mentioning Kaisra Shehraz in particular for that. She has tried to recontextualize Islam and Muslim in today's world. Very intelligent, very sane, sensible description of the Muslim way of life in relation to the challenges of today's world. So I would urge some of these students to go through to read these. And then there is a very long list of Muslim writers, both men and women, who have been writing, whether it is Abdul Razak Gurnar, Ahdaf Saif, or Khalid Hussaini, Tabish Khair, Mahmood Rahman from Bangladesh. So there is a very long list, and they are worth studying. Their brief account appears in my paper, so you can go through that. Now, very quickly, let me come to the final part of my presentation, because time is almost up, 2 minutes are there. And Professor Marathe has set such a good example of keeping time, so I would like to follow in his shoes, at least in this respect, if not in his scholarship and his thorough understanding of literature. Right, so the new areas of research, that is again a very fascinating topic chosen by the conference organizers. She mentioned that I'm a visiting professor at the University of Leicester. Last time when I was there, so 2 new faculty members had been recruited. Naturally, I was introduced to them. The first one, and both of them quite young, and of course, they already had PhDs. One was, naturally I asked, what is your area of interest? His area of interest was asylum seekers in Britain. Here is a lecturer in English, and his PhD, his published book is Asylum Seekers in Britain. The other one was a girl. What's your area of interest? Eco-literature. I thought, eco, what is eco? Then she elaborated that was ecology. How ecology has been treated in literature, and then she was talking about eco-composition. Long list of eco-composers. I knew only about music composers, and here was eco-composers, those who have written poems, plays, and creative writings for maintaining, preserving ecology. So this gives you some idea of new areas of research. I have indicated some of these here. One area also which I would like you to discuss, some of the students here, about Islamic vocabulary. Islamic vocabulary in the sense that some books have been published there, because many theological terms, whether even to begin with God and Allah, Allah is not reflected in the word God, same is prayer, same is apostle, so many seminal key Islamic concepts which have not been so far satisfactorily translated into English. So that could be an area worth exploring. Just as the last point, let me tell you, as far as this literary Orientalism or politics of literature is concerned, don't think that it is something very novel or it is something about which you will not find any material. I recently carried out a survey. There are as many as 900 critical books on this topic, 400 PhD theses, and again hundreds of articles and conference presentations on these points which I was just talking, on the politics of literature, on literary Orientalism, on Muslim writings. And so there's a plenty of material, plenty of things to, I give you just one example, and that sums up. In Georgetown, the book has come out, Building Borders with New Orientalism, Cultural Appreciation, Appropriation, and Representation. That is also the spirit of this particular seminar, that's cultural appreciation, appropriation, and representation. So I'm sure the deliberation of the seminar will go a very long way in achieving this cultural, I repeat again because it is highly significant, appropriation, appreciation, and representation. This is what non-native literature is about. This is what the conference theme is about. And I once again thank you for your patient listening. Thank you very much.